it's often common for collaborative skills and solo skills to be very separated when where there certainly are some differences here and there. But I would say the majority of the skills absolutely overlap and can and I think should be taught together, so that the way that it is introduced to the student is not, oh yeah, I have my piano stuff and then I do this accompanying stuff over here. Everything is combined together as core musicianship skills that can be used in both capacities. So I think that that's important to note. And yes, I agree with you. A lot of things can be done even in one-on-one lessons that help develop those skills.
Hey there, I'm Rachel Ehring, and you're listening to the Top Music Piano Podcast. Get inspired as we discuss creative resources, trends in piano pedagogy, ways to grow your income and streamline your studio, and new ways to engage your students each week. If you are a teacher who wants to go beyond the method books to create an innovative studio that fosters lifelong music makers, you've come to the right place. Hello there, piano teachers. Thank you so much for being here today and tuning in every week. I hope that you know how much it means to me that you listen to this podcast. And I also think it shows that you're the kind of piano teacher who wants to keep growing and learning, and your students are so lucky to have you in their lives. Speaking of learning and growing, if you have ever wanted to have your students do more duet playing or have wondered if you should be doing more collaborative type activities in your studio, my guest today has exactly what you need. She gives some great sight reading insights, and then she has some fantastic ideas about how to prepare your students to accompany and collaborate, even if it's just you and the student in the lesson. Here's a little bit about Jenna. Dr. Jenna Braaksma is Assistant Professor of Collaborative Piano and Piano Pedagogy at the University of Northern Colorado, where she teaches collaborative piano, class piano, and piano pedagogy courses. She also advises graduate assistants and serves as a collaborative pianist for faculty and guest artist performances. A dedicated educator, Dr. Braaksma brings a wealth of experience from applied studios, secondary schools, and higher education institutions. Prior to working at UNC, Dr. Braaksma served as class piano coordinator and instructor in the Piano Pedagogy Laboratory program at the University of Michigan. She has also held faculty positions at Buena Vista University and Dordt University. An active collaborative pianist, adjudicator, and researcher, Dr. Braaksma regularly presents at regional, state, and national conferences. Her research focuses on collaborative piano pedagogy, functional piano skills for music educators, and sight reading development. Dr. Braaksma holds a PhD in music education with an emphasis in piano pedagogy from Florida State University, dual master's degrees from the University of Missouri, and a Bachelor of Music from Iowa State University. Here's my talk with Jenna Braaksma. Hi, Jenna. Welcome to the show. I'm really excited that you are here today. Could you start by introducing yourself and tell us a little about what you do?
Sure. Well, my name is Jenna Braaksma, and I am in my first year as Assistant Professor of Collaborative Piano and Piano Pedagogy at the University of Northern Colorado. So before coming to Colorado, I worked for 3 years at the University of Michigan, and I assisted with the class piano program, and I taught in the pre-college program. So I taught beginners all the way up to some pretty advanced high school students. And here in Colorado, I teach the graduate collaborative piano lessons. I oversee our class piano program for undergrads. So I teach sections, and I also help the graduate students that teach the sections as well. And then I do some advising for our graduate students. And then outside of my teaching, I am pretty active as a collaborator with my colleagues or guest artists that come to UNC. And I usually am presenting at different music conferences around the country, and my topics typically are an intersection of collaborative piano and piano pedagogy.
Amazing. And that's actually how I first was introduced to you, is I heard you speak at the NCKP conference on sight reading. So we're going to talk a little about that. I have to say, though, being an expert in both pedagogy and collaborative piano, I think it's rare, because having kind of been in that world, even though they're both obviously piano and related, they are very different, and people tend to kind of gravitate toward one or the other. So I'm sure that UNC was so happy to find somebody who had expertise in both of those fields and could teach both of those and oversee those programs. So I think that's really cool that you're doing both and that it sounds like you found a job that's a really good fit for your skills. Today, we're going to talk about one of my all-time favorite topics, which is collaborative piano. If people have been here for a while, they know that I could talk all day and all night about collaborative piano. But I do want to touch a little bit on sight reading, since I know that's another area of study for you. And that's what I heard you speak about. Can you just give a few quick tips that we can use with our students, or maybe even with ourselves if we want to improve our own sight reading, for improving our sight reading skills?
Sure. I think one of the things that comes up with my students, whether they are beginners or they are, collegiate level pianists working on their sight reading skills, is just understanding the score and what they should look for when they have a little bit of preview time, or, quick analysis time is usually what I call it with my own students. So helping them understand what they're looking for outside of your typical things like what's your time signature, what's your key signature, etc. So more specific things that I'm guiding my students to look for would be hand position changes, what are any patterns or repetitions that you can identify. And then if you go, a little bit more detailed within pitches, you're looking at note direction. Does that affect hand position movements? Are there any intervals that are, readily identifiable? Skips, steps, any chord patterns, etc. Are there progressions that you can look for? So essentially being able to label anything identifiable. And that contributes to some of the key goals that I think contributes to successful sight reading, which would be keeping your eyes moving ahead so that they're not pausing on the music. We want our eyes continually looking ahead, because then they can take in more information. And that expands the number of beats that your eyes can look ahead, or even if you're able to look about a measure ahead, that can lead to successful sight reading. And then as you're able to recognize those key features that we talked about before and different structures within the music, like phrase structures, patterns that come back, you can start to relate your visual image of what you're seeing to a physical visual plan. So an example of that would be, I recognize that this is a G major chord. Let's say it's in root position. I'm immediately thinking, G major chord, I know the fingering that I'm going to use, and I know the hand shape that I'm going to make. And then as you work with more advanced students, if they are, working through triads and inversions and things like that, they can recognize immediately, I see the third is on the bottom of this chord. I know it's in first inversion in my right hand. I know the fingering pattern. Now I see it's an A major chord. So they're starting to put those pieces together visually that they can turn into physical action, which then makes the sight reading process a little bit easier as you're trying to put all those puzzle pieces together.
Mm-hmm. So if I'm hearing you right, it sounds like there's kind of two parts. There's what you do before you ever start playing, by looking over the score, identifying patterns, seeing the changes that might be coming. And then there's what your brain and fingers are doing when you're actually sight reading, that looking ahead, that recognizing patterns, all of those things. Am I articulating that correctly?
Yes. There's a pretty secure connection between the visual part and the auditory part of what you are starting to recognize. From what you see, you can recognize what it would sound like, and then you're turning that into the physical action. And what's amazing is that our brain has the ability to do all of this in milliseconds, but our strongest sight readers are able to make those connections from the visual to the auditory to the physical faster, as opposed to it being three separate things. It becomes one combined process.
Mm-hmm. And this is why we have to teach our students to practice their scales and arpeggios and chord progressions, because that's what music is made up of, right? And so our brains and our ears are going to be able to identify those so much faster, having done all those scales and chords and everything. Would you agree?
Exactly. And in addition to that, it helps develop a kinesthetic awareness on the piano, because everybody loves practicing their scales and arpeggios and chord progressions and things like that. But you can turn them into fun games. I've done this with some of my younger students, where you can take your 5-finger patterns or your very basic chord progressions and then, play them all over the keyboard. We call them up and down games, where I'll say, jump up to this pattern, jump down to this pattern, and they have to find where to go. And you can do that in a variety of ways. You can just do verbal instructions. Sometimes I use these little colored cotton balls, and I'll just, place the cotton ball on the keyboard so they know where they have to jump, and then they can verbally identify to me where they moved. So there's, a back and forth that way where they're giving me the information, and then we can do find and freeze games. I like to think of that as like a musical Twister type of game where I'm giving the direction of where I want them to move, and then they have to find and freeze. Or, knock knock games where they find the location of where they're supposed to go, and then they get to knock on the piano, like on the location, kind of like a knock knock joke. And any of those things can be done with eyes closed too, as the student becomes more comfortable, so that as they're reading, some of that physical awareness is already developed in them.
Yeah. So since we're talking about like ideas for the youngest learners, something that you said, you were talking about looking ahead. And I was thinking to some of my youngest students and how I'm already in their very simple songs encouraging them to look ahead, because the tendency is to like stop at that bar line, right? And kind of reset for the next measure. Do you have any other tips for the youngest learners, our beginners? How can we set them up for later success with these sight reading skills?
I think for the youngest learners, turning it into a game is one of the most exciting things for them, or a competition of how many notes can I play? How many notes can I play correctly? And that's very easy if you're using any of the different sight reading apps that are available now, where the music scrolls. So that's naturally going to keep the eyes moving forward. And different apps will have different settings that you can experiment with, whether the music beats or the music notes are revealed right before the student plays them, so they have to be watching the music to know what to play. Or you can flip it around the other way, and the notes or the beat will disappear after it occurs. So the student has to play it, otherwise they'll miss it and they won't know what to play. So that definitely keeps their eyes engaged and on the music. And you can certainly create those things even if you're not using an app. You can just use a sheet of paper either to, reveal the notes as the student is reading, or to cover up the notes as they've been played, so the student's eyes keep moving forward. Those have been some pretty successful things that I've done with my students, whether they're in private lessons or group piano classes. And it's fun when you're in a group setting and the partners get to work together. Then they're the one controlling the paper, and there can be a lot of good social interaction and a little healthy competition too.
Yeah, I love that idea. Do you have any favorite sight reading apps that you would want to mention or recommend?
Sure. On the rhythm side, when I taught in the public schools, I taught in a magnet program for a little while after finishing my doctorate degree, and I loved using Rhythm Randomizer or Rhythm Generator. These are all free apps that you can access online, and they're exactly like what they sound. They just continue generating, various rhythms, and you can control the difficulty level. And this can be great as a foundational level for sight reading, where students are just doing the rhythms. And you can control how long the examples are, whether there are, complex rhythms, simple rhythms, etc. So I like starting with those. And then I've used a variety of different sight reading apps. Sight reading training is great. You can have still or scrolling notes. You can work with triads, seventh chords, different intervals. Make Music Sight Reading Studio and Sight Reading Factory are pretty similar, where there are free versions of that. But then, of course, if you want to have the subscription, you have a little bit more options in terms of what's available for different exercises that you can use. And then, of course, there's Piano Marvel. And then I've also experimented with some of the Piano Adventure sight reading coach. And then the RCM curriculum also has some sight reading that I've used in the past.
Amazing. Wow. Thank you. You just rattled all of those off. I love it. That's fantastic. All right. Let's transition here and talk a little bit about collaborative piano.
Sure.
Tell me how you became interested in collaborative piano. What did your journey look like?
I think I was very lucky to grow up, even though it was a very small community in Northwest Iowa, I grew up with a lot of great musical influences as a child, getting to see different pianists and musicians perform, whether it was at my church on a Sunday morning, getting to see, a pianist play with a choir, or more consistently, there are two pianists that often did piano organ duets. And that just enamored me as a child, getting to, see them play every Sunday. different events at my school and my community were incredibly influential. As a kid, I played a lot of sports and I loved being on a team and contributing to that group as a whole. So I think I very quickly fell in love with collaborating because it's the team version, on the musical side of things. So as I continued taking piano lessons, I knew I was interested in collaborating in that way because I wanted to contribute to the musical team. And I was very lucky to have teachers that supported me to provide opportunities for me to play for choirs, starting even when I was in middle school and then all throughout high school. And when I got to college as just a regular piano major, I knew that I wanted to collaborate and teach, but I really thought that teaching was going to be the primary and collaborating would just happen on the side. And it was one of the vocal teachers that I happened to be working with my freshman year said, well, Jenna, you can do this as a career. And that was a huge opening for me because I had not really been experienced to that option before. So when I went on to pursue my graduate work, I first started as a collaborative piano major, and then I added on the second master's in pedagogy to be able to combine the two together because I was interested in collaborating, but equally interested in teaching how to collaborate as well, as particularly for beginners, because there's not a lot of information on, teaching those developmental skills. So from graduate work, I went on to do my PhD at FSU, where I could continue to receive high-level training in both of those worlds, collaborative piano and pedagogy. And I've been very lucky since then that I've been able to work in both of those worlds and now have been able to combine those two things at UNC.
That's so interesting because our paths are very similar for a lot of that. Like I grew up in a small town in Kansas and, saw people playing in church, and I had experiences playing in church and for my high school choir and things like that. But I think the difference I heard is that I didn't have someone when I was a freshman piano major say, this could be a career for you. And I wish that I had. Actually, when I was a senior in college, one of the voice professors said, hey, one of our staff accompanists is retiring. Would you be interested? And so it was similar and I got there, but I wish I had known sooner because I remember for those 4 years of college thinking, I have no idea what I'm going to do with this piano degree because I didn't really want to teach. So I just didn't know that that was even an option. So that's part of my mission now is to tell pianists, like, this is an option for you.
I think I had always seen it be something that was on the side, not necessarily the primary. So I knew that was possible. But when it was opened up as the primary career option, that really, changed things for me. And again, was very grateful to have different teachers that were able to help me find that path and kind of trailblaze at the time to be able to put those two worlds together because they're not often combined in different ways. And I was just very lucky to have advisors and teachers that were able to make that possible. And I'm very grateful for that.
Yes. Amazing. So we both got there eventually in our own ways. Do you think it's important for younger students before college to have collaborative experiences? And what do you think that should look like?
Absolutely. I think collaboration at such a young age, I think really solidifies a lot of the musicianship skills that students are already learning in their lessons, whether that's communication with other musicians, their listening skills, just their overall musical awareness. And as we know, when students start taking piano lessons, it can be a very isolating experience at first because you're taking lessons by yourself, just with you and your teacher. You're typically practicing alone. You're often performing alone. So sometimes it can feel very isolating. So I think collaborating provides the experiences that can help build some really essential musical skills that any musician can use, regardless of the career path that they're on. Whether that's flexibility, awareness, responsiveness to musical partners, etc., maintaining a steady beat, having an awareness of balance and tone and pacing and things like that, that you may not experience in quite the same way if you're just playing by yourself. So I think those things are incredibly important. And outside of playing, I think it helps build responsibility and accountability to the partners that you're playing with because you're part of that team or, ensemble mentality. So depending on what you happen to go on to pursue, whether it's music related or not, you're developing how to work with people productively, communicate respectfully, be adaptive. And those are really valuable, not only musicianship skills, but just life skills in general. So I think collaboration can definitely start at a young age, and there are a lot of benefits for it.
Yeah. Can you give some examples of collaborative experiences that our younger students, maybe up through high school, that we could provide for them?
Absolutely. I think even beginners, like very first lesson, you've taught them their white keys and black keys, and you're, showing them black key groupings. One of the first things that you can do in a lesson, even on day one of teaching students the layout of the keyboard, etc., is allow them to improvise, just do a very easy black key improvisation while you comp some chords. And they're immediately feeling satisfaction of, I'm getting to play and I'm making music. This is really fun. You're giving them that immediate sense of satisfaction and success. But what they're also doing is starting to develop awareness of, oh, I'm playing. This other person is playing at the same time. I'm starting to process all of that musical information that is happening all around me. So I think from day one, you can start integrating some of those things. And then as students start to read, I think one of the easiest ways to start integrating collaborative skills is to do the teacher-student duets that are often built into the method books. And that can start with you first, where you're working on rhythmic alignment, keeping a steady beat. How do we start together? Are there little cues that we're passing back and forth? Those, foundational type of communication skills. And this can, of course, expand to, duets in the studio or ensemble playing, depending on what that looks like. But outside playing, there are a lot of things that you can do that will contribute to both solo playing and collaborative playing. This can be simple rhythm and movement activities like clapping games or echo patterns, or even just different movement exercises like having the student conduct along with you. Can help them become more aware and flexible in, pacing and working with another musician. Call and response or improv games are really great for this because you can have a short musical conversation, but it teaches listening and the student is reacting to what they're hearing in real time. Singing while playing is great, or if the student sings while you're playing, they have to react to you. So this really focuses on the interactive components of collaborative activities to help strengthen those skills that can be used for solo or collaborative playing.
I love this because my next question was going to be about the logistics of collaboration in the studio. But these activities that you mentioned, you don't have to worry about the logistics because it's you and the student. It doesn't necessarily have to involve other musicians. I think you kind of just blew my mind a little bit.
Yes, there are a lot of different things that you can do, even if it's just a one-on-one lesson, that are strengthening both areas. And I think that's something. To note too, that it's often common for collaborative skills and solo skills to be very separated when there certainly are some differences here and there. But I would say the majority of the skills absolutely overlap and can and I think should be taught together, so that the way that it is introduced to the student is not, oh yeah, I have my piano stuff and then I do this accompanying stuff over here. Everything is combined together as core musicianship skills that can be used in both capacities. So I think that that's important to note. And yes, I agree with you. A lot of things can be done even in one-on-one lessons that help develop those skills.
Fantastic. So if a teacher has never really thought about this or incorporating these skills in their studio, where would they start?
Great question. Great question. I think let's first talk about maybe some of the logistics of collaborating in the studio, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about repertoire. So I think some achievable goals would be a little bit of what I talked about before. So students can play with you first, the teacher, whether that's, just playing the accompaniment part to repertoire that the students are actually learning. There's short exercises that they're playing in their method books, and that can certainly be expanded to work outside of the method books if they have a supplementary duet book, that type of thing where they're playing with you. And then depending on how your studio is set up, and of course, some logistical things that we can talk about, the benefits of being able to pair a student with another student in the studio are huge and really beneficial. whether that the two students are at the exact or relatively same level, or if you have one student that's maybe a little bit ahead or, below, you can certainly work that out with staggered, difficulties of duets. If you have, an upper level beginner and kind of a lower level intermediate player, you can easily balance those out. So I would start there, if possible, to arrange that. And then what I've done for some of my students in the past would be to try to schedule their lessons back to back, if possible. And I know schedules can be a little tricky sometimes. But if possible to do that, then you can take the back half of somebody's lesson and the beginning half of the next person's lesson, and then that can be 5 to 10 minutes of duet time if you want to approach it that way. You can also try to pair, if you have siblings, you can pair them together. And that has a range of benefits for the family because the parents are usually really excited to see their kids play together. On your end, the kids can practice at home because they live in the same house. And usually if you have siblings, you often have back-to-back lessons, and then you can arrange the schedule that way. I've also had students that were able to play with a parent or a grandparent or a guardian of some kind. And that's been really beneficial, obviously musically, but, really important family connection that they got to share that experience together. If you have the opportunity to do group classes or studio classes, and you can design this however you like, whether you have maybe in a month, you have 3 weeks of solo lessons like normal, and then you have a collaborative week where you arrange the lessons and then the students come and do their duet playing. You can do that, or you can do a studio class and have students come in, if it worked for everybody, like on a Saturday morning where you got to work with with the students, you got to give coachings to the students. They did get to do different games together. Kind of like what we talked about before, like the rhythm games or the call and response things, to have kind of a collaborative day. So I would start there. And then in terms of repertoire, choosing something that is accessible quickly is going to be key. So things that are rhythmically clear, simple rhythms, balanced phrase links that are easy for the student to follow. And then choosing pieces that can be really rewarding without a lot of extra rehearsal time so that they're experiencing that success and it's building their enthusiasm for future collaborations. So I would start there with repertoire, and I can certainly give some book recommendations if you like. Would that be helpful?
Yes. Before you do that real quick, I think what I'm hearing you say is that giving them something that's maybe a little bit below the level of their solo repertoire so that they can be successful and they can be honing these skills of following and listening and keeping the rhythm going. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes. I would recommend starting, just below, like you were saying, just below their solo difficulty rep. So it allows the student to take on some of those new skills as they're developing. If something is really technically challenging, it's going to be very difficult for them to maintain tempo and consistency with a partner. So having something a little bit more accessible in the developing stages, I think can be a huge benefit to a student as they're kind of stretching their musicianship skills in new ways.
Okay. Yes, I would love some book repertoire recommendations.
Sure. So some books that are actually a little bit newer to me, but I've really been enjoying them. The first one is Delightfully Easy Piano Duets for Beginning and Intermediate Players. The Rosamund Conrad is the composer. There are 2 books, so there's no progression between the 2 books, but the music is primarily beginner level for the primo, and then secondo is more of an intermediate level, so that could easily be played by a teacher, or if they are paired with a more upper level student in the studio. And the primo part is primarily 5-finger pattern based. It can be played with one hand or both hands, so you have some different ability levels that you can explore with your students. And then I really have enjoyed these. The Ryan's Duet book by June Armstrong. They're also 5-finger pattern based, but the pieces are cleverly named after playing cards. So there's, Jack of Diamonds and Queen of Hearts. So the reading is still 5-finger pattern based, but is a little bit more elevated than the Delightfully Easy piano books where the student is primarily playing in octaves. But those are really fun. I think the one that I'm enjoying the most right now is called Fairyland in Treble. And it's a series of 11 duets. And the music has a very, computer game soundtrack esque vibe based on some of the work that the composer has previously done. So it's 11 duets that are based on different stories, and there's a little story that's involved or that's given with each of them that's given in a fairy tale style. So it's really imaginative writing and is a little bit more elevated than the other books. So I would say the pianist is probably more of upper elementary, moving from upper elementary into late intermediate. And they're really fun pieces to play, I'd say, for both the student and the teacher. And then, of course, in the past, I've done your pretty standard, Kaleidoscope duets, the celebrated piano duets by Robert Vandal, and then, of course, the Masterwork Classics duet books, too.
Okay. I will try and get links for those and put them in the show notes in case people weren't able to scribble fast enough. I wasn't able to scribble fast enough. So I'll look for links and put those down below so that people can find those.
Yes.
That's amazing. And I hadn't heard of some of those. So I'm so excited.
They were new to me, too.
Yeah. I want to check it out.
And if people are looking for ensemble experiences that aren't just piano duets, even though that's the foundational place of where you want to start with collaborative skills. If you have an opportunity to connect with different studios in your community, whether that's, beginner woodwind players or violinists, cellists, etc., there are a couple of good resources for piano trios that are developmental. The first one is called Tunes for My Piano Trio by Sheila Nelson. There are 2 volumes, and this is primarily for late in elementary level, so violin, cello, and piano. And then the second one is more for late intermediate stage, and it's called Tableau of Trios. And that's also for piano, violin, and cello. So if you're able to connect with another studio, in your community, I think that could be a really fun way to get students together. And, they can perform in a recital or, at a school or a community event, could be really beneficial if you wanted to do something outside of the studio.
Absolutely. And sometimes we even have students in our studio who play a second instrument or who take voice lessons or something. And so we could even have collaborations within our studio.
Oh, I love that idea. That's a great idea.
Yeah. This has been so helpful, Jenna. I feel like you gave so much information in about 30 minutes. It was incredible. Do you have any final words you want to share with people about these topics?
I think we talked a lot about different ways that you can start doing more collaborative activities in your lessons or integrating those things into your teaching. So if you are a teacher who has never done this before, or you are interested in doing more of it, I think it's important to start with small goals. As teachers, I speak for myself. We have an idea in mind and we want to see that through and we want to go straight to the end. But remember that it is not a sprint. It is a marathon, to put together the little puzzle pieces. So focus on little changes that you can do in your studio first, to start building in the collaborative experiences. So whether that's just starting with a duet between yourself and the student, and then being able to maybe expand that to, okay, I'm going to start pairing students together. And we're going to integrate a solo piece and a duet piece for each student at my next recital so that they get that sense of satisfaction. And there's a goal for doing that extra training. I think that's important too. So next part is communication with the parents to understand, if there needs to be scheduling changes or how you're arranging the schedule so you can build that into the culture of your studio. And then as the process is put together, the parents can see the benefit of the educational value, and then any bumps that happen will be totally outweighed by the benefits of the musical connections and the satisfaction and enthusiasm that the students have when they get to play with a partner. So start small, little pieces, and then you'll reach that goal.
Yeah, just letting it grow kind of organically, but with some guidance. I love that.
Exactly. Yes.
If people have any questions or want to learn about what you do, learn more about you, ask you questions, where can they find you?
Sure. I'd love to hear from you if you have questions, or I'm always open to recommendations. I like sharing ideas back and forth. Feel free to email me at jenna.braaksma@gmail.com. And I know I have a unique last name, and it is spelled Braaksma. So please feel free to send me an email. I'd love to hear from you and be able to connect and share some ideas together.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jenna, for being here and sharing all of your wisdom about sight reading and collaborative piano with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
I hope that you learned something from this episode. I loved how Jenna gave us a number of ideas that we can use before ever having our students accompany another student or a choir or anything like that. She made the barrier to entry for teaching collaborative skills really low and even showed us how we can start teaching these skills in the very first piano lesson. If you found something valuable in this episode, I would love for you to share it with one of your piano teacher friends who you think would enjoy learning about these ideas. We are all in this together, and sharing this podcast is a simple and free way that you can not only support the show, but also support your piano teacher friends. Thank you for being here today. I really appreciate you. That is the end of the show for this week. I'm Rachel Ehring, and you've been listening to the Top Music Piano Podcast. I'll talk to you again next time.
How do you keep up to date with all the latest trends and research into music education? How do you connect with other teachers around the world and make sure your teaching stays fresh and relevant for students of all ages and stages, both now and into the future? I created our Top Music Pro membership to be the one-stop shop for music teaching resources, training, support and community, and I'd love for you to come and join us inside. With over 40 comprehensive training courses, hundreds of teaching demonstrations and lesson plans, free monthly sheet music, discounts, and all the business and pedagogy support you could ever need, Top Music Pro is the community you've been looking for. If you're ready to level up your learning from the podcast and join thousands of other teachers in our global network, head over to topmusicpro.com today.